Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Yellow Gloves podcast. My name's Chris and today we're going to be discussing Cage Warriors 165 in San Diego, which also happens to be the final Cage Warriors card of 2023. Now, don't go worrying. There will be another episode of the pod later on, I guess next week after the whole Christmas period, to do our end of year awards where we'll award a Fighter of the Year, Fight of the Year, Card of the Year, Finish of the Year. We're going to do so many things and I'm super excited for it. But before any of that, we had 10 fights in San Diego. We had some big prospects on this card. Let's get into it. So as we always do, we're going to work our way from the main event all the way down to the very first prelim on the card. And in the main event, we had Roberto Hernandez versus Trevin Jones. Hernandez 8-1, a guy I think should be in and around title contention in Cage Warriors. Trevin Jones, of course, UFC veteran, made his Cage Warriors debut in September, beat Wilson Hayes by decision in a fairly uneventful fight. But on Roberto Hernandez, what I love about this guy is, lost his very first fight as a pro, hasn't lost since. Starting to get finishes. His last fight against Toby Misek absolutely destroyed him with a body shot. I was very excited for this fight because I think for Hernandez it posed a really interesting test. He's fighting a 17-fight veteran, a guy who's been in the UFC, a real opportunity for him to really test his mettle against... I think he's faced... I don't know that he's faced better opponents, but I think he's faced sharper opponents. But Trevin Jones is a really, really good test for him. And for me, he passed with flying colours. I scored it 30-27 to Roberto Hernandez. A couple of judges gave it 29-28, which I can see. And we'll go through the rounds shortly. But I really thought that, any questions you might have had about Roberto Hernandez, defensively as a wrestler, no issues here. I mean, Trevin Jones tried very hard. And look, Hernandez did very well in the grappling exchanges. I think he's a better grappler than Trevin Jones. I don't know that he's a better wrestler, offensively. But I think as a grappler, Trevin Jones really had nothing for Roberto Hernandez in this fight. What I love about Hernandez, I always say this, patient but violent. I don't think he gets enough props for this due to all the decisions on his record, but he's just a super smart 135er. Every time in round one that Jones tried to press him, he would just get clocked with a right hook that would stagger him. I love the roundhouse kick to the body from Hernandez, and he really started this fight, digging to the body early, setting up his traps early, and I really like that. The roundhouse kicks I already mentioned, but he had this prodding straight to the body as well, like straight right hand to the body, and it was adding up for me. Jones, for the whole fight, what kept kind of, sticking with me was Jones just didn't have the striking arsenal that Hernandez had. And every time that Hernandez would, go to the body, go to the head, like really diversifying his array of strikes, it would just overwhelm Jones. So, first round very clearly 10-9 to Hernandez. Where I think there was some contention is round two. You had a lot of wrestling from Trevin Jones, a lot of it. He jumped Gilly early into the round. Hernandez kept his balance, went straight into half guard and escaped the choke, which was really good. But Jones was wrestling heavily in this round and he really controlled proceedings until the last minute and a half where Hernandez got back to his feet, started stalking Jones, couple of lovely left hooks to the body. Jones tried to attack the gilly again towards the end of the round. Hernandez lands a huge elbow on the ground, loads of strikes. I scored it for Hernandez. I mean, I can definitely see the argument for Jones. He did attempt 2 submissions. He didn't throw any strikes, really. I thought that whenever Hernandez had the opportunity to be the aggressor, he was really putting it on Jones. So, if we're going damage and scoring it the way it should be scored, I really think Hernandez had an argument here, and I certainly thought 2018 Hernandez going into round 3. Round 3, Hernandez again stalking early, straight left to the body. He's really fallen in love with the strikes to the body, in my opinion, and I think he's all the better for it. Then there's a gorgeous counter knee to the midsection from him too, just really like brilliant kind of strike into the body. I always say this, and it's kind of become a running joke on the pod, but we'll say it again. If you strike to the body, you're a friend of mine, and Roberto Hernandez is definitely becoming one of those friends. Jones offered very little resistance in this round. To be fair, there was low output from both guys, but Hernandez was at least putting stuff out there and, putting hands on Trevin Jones. He found the back towards the end of the round, tried to get the rear naked choke with a minute to go, was kind of backed up against the fence a little, so couldn't quite get the angle, and then just started throwing punches off his back just to score. Like I said, I scored at 30-27 Hernandez. If you want to give Jones round 2, fine. But Hernandez is now 9-1. I say this all the time, but let's fucking get this guy in the UK and let's see him take on some of the best bantamweights over here. I think he's done what he needed to do in San Diego in that circuit. I think any next fight that Hernandez has, if it's in San Diego, it's going to have to be a new guy who's never fought for cage warriors before, and maybe someone they've poached off, someone who's leaving the UFC and, they just want to have a fight. He really needs to be tested at this point, and I think they've done a great job building him up. But I think now is the opportunity to really have him tested against the better fighters in this organization, because I don't like the idea of, well, there's Cage Warriors, then there's the San Diego scene, then there's the Rome scene. I think they do a phenomenal job integrating Rome into the overall Cage Warriors portfolio. Obviously, that's easier because it's in Europe, but I would love to see a little bit more crossover. And we certainly have had examples, right? Like, don't get me wrong, we have had examples. Kyle Driscoll's a great one, but Roberto Hernandez is the guy I want to see in the UK next. So let's get that done, please. Cannot wait to see Roberto Hernandez in action again. In the co-main event, we had Ahmad Hassanzada versus Chasen Blair. Listen, this one was a banger for as long as it lasted. Hassanzada has been a big name in the scene for a while. Fought on the Contender Series, appeared in LFA a few times. On a 2-fight losing streak, yes, but 9-3 as a pro, making his Cage Warriors debut. Tons of finishes. Chasen Blair, of course, 3-1. Fairly big wrestling pedigree in MMA. All of his pro fights in the Cage Warriors San Diego circuit. This was his first fight in 2023. He had a incredible New Year's Eve 12-second knockout in 2022. So it's great to see Chasen Blair back in action after almost a year away. He's a prospect that I've been, fairly excited about on this pod before. So it's nice to see him in action again. But while it was nice to see him in action, certainly what happened in the fight might have caught a few people by surprise. Didn't really catch me by surprise because very familiar with Hassanzada as a fighter. But, Chasen Blair started early, roundhouse kick, looping overhand, but it was a bit rushed. And when I started to see the way that Chasen Blair was approaching this fight, I had a feeling Hassanzada was going to punish him. Blair was doing a great job slapping to the body with the roundhouse. Hassanzada playing it up to the crowd. But, Blair was slipping when he was kicking, and it just felt so skittish and so frenetic, the pace. And there's definitely another fight on this card that had that same vibe. But Hassanzada, once he saw that Blair was really skittish, all of a sudden he stopped walking backwards and just started walking forward. And once he took that front foot, maybe halfway through round 1, you just saw the comfortability in him as a pressure fighter. Big knee to the body, right hook, roundhouse. The pendulum really swung at that point when he was, stringing together those strikes. Blair started to rush Hassanzada, definitely hit him with a slew of strikes, and they were trading. The lead left hook to the liver, just gorgeous. Hassanzada landed it like 1 or 2 times, and it was really troubling Blair. And then we got the finish, right? And the finish was really interesting because it's Hassanzada who does something a bit silly, goes for the spinning elbow, very lazy one. Blair punishes him, gets the body lock takedown. At this point, you think, well, this is Blair's bag. He's going to wrestle him. But if you've watched Hassanzada fight, he's a really sneaky grappler. Blair goes a bit too high on the rear naked choke. Hassanzada rolls for the knee, locks in one of the nastiest knee bars you'll see, like full extension. You just knew that the longer he talks on that leg, Blair's likelier to have shred more and more ligaments in his knee. And that's how you punish a mat return, in my opinion, and a fighter riding too high on your back. Just a gorgeous submission. Immense Cage Warriors debut for Hassanzada. Let's get this guy back in there ASAP. Bobby Winther versus Anthony Zaragoza was the next fight on the card, and it didn't last very long, but we'll just give some preamble going into this. Bobby Winther making his return to Cage Warriors after a sick knockout win in his pro debut, actually, and Cage Warriors debut back in September. Anthony Zaragoza, 1-1, debuting in the yellow gloves, missed weight by 3 pounds. Before the card started, Bobby Winther was one of the guys I had circled as I'm very excited to watch this guy fight, which, I rag on the San Diego scene quite a bit, and in all honesty, I didn't stay up to watch this card because my appetite still isn't there for these San Diego cards. But I'm starting to really enjoy a few fighters, and Bobby Winther was one who, when he made his debut, I made sure that whenever this guy fights next, I'll be there to watch it. And this one was a barn burner. It lasted only 1 minute and a half, like less than 90 seconds even. But it was as fun as you could have imagined. For that 90 seconds, it was just brilliant. Bobby Winther pushing Zaragoza up against the fence early. They disengaged from the fence wrestling, which is great because Winther just started to let his hand go. Winther just started to let his hands go. Couple of nice straight lefts and a calf kick from Winther. Zaragoza then just started putting hands on Bobby Winther and landed some really powerful strikes, including a massive, massive uppercut. Winther, it looked like he was gonna lose to me, but Winther, very smart for someone who's only just started as a pro, just went for the level change the minute he felt that the tide was shifting a little bit. And look, the minute he gets the level change, gets Zaragoza down, immediately isolates an arm as he's taking him down, which is just hallmark of a great grappler. Rolls to his back with that arm still trapped, talks on it, and draws the quick tap out of Zaragoza. Just a stunning armbar, a wild 90 seconds. And when Bobby Winther gets up, you realize just how important that armbar was, because one of his eyes is completely swollen shut, as in the referee we would have had a doctor stoppage in between rounds, more than likely, maybe even before. Like, we might not have seen much more of this fight if Bobby Winther doesn't get that armbar within 90 seconds. It's then not only the fact that his eye is swollen shut, but also his face is heavily bloodied. I don't know if there was a cut in there or something, but he managed to survive and found an arm in a rapid manner. Just such a fascinating fight, because you really think that had Bobby Winther not gotten that armbar, had the fight lasted another 90 seconds, we might have seen a doctor step in and stop it, because his eye was immediately swollen shut. Like, he could not look out of, I believe it was his left eye. Just immense stuff from Bobby Winther. 2-0 as a pro now, 2 finishes, great adaptability, and almost great cage IQ and just a savvy fighter he is to not only survive what had happened, but realize that he needed to go for it. Anthony Zaragoza, not sure if we'll see him again with the weight miss and the fairly unfavourable record. I guess 1-2 is not an incredibly big deal, but look, maybe we see him again, maybe we don't. But a guy we definitely will see again is Bobby Winther, and he keeps performing like that. He might be one of the guys that has me up at 2-3 a.m. watching these San Diego cards and not just waiting until the next day to watch it. And speaking of the San Diego scene and fighters I really enjoy, Anthony Orozco was the next fight. It wasn't the next fight. It was the fight prior to this, but it's the next one that we'll talk about. And it's the battle of the Orozcos. Anthony Orozco versus Benny Orozco. No relation between the two. But Anthony Orozco, 1-0, mega prospect in the IMAF scene. The guy did an incredible job as an amateur. Has gone pro now. His Cage Warriors debut was a banger back in June. Completely nuked Jeremy Fataruso, I believe it was. And for Benny Orozco, stepping in on very short notice for Blake Perry, quite a credible grappler from the bits that I'd seen, and definitely in this fight you could see that he really is all about his wrestling. I just can't say enough good things about Anthony Orozco. Anyone who's listened to the pod, anyone who follows me on Twitter, you'll know exactly how I feel about this guy. We'll get into the fight and we'll do some bits after, but I felt that the beginning of the fight was really frenetic from Anthony especially, and I felt like he was almost chasing the finish a bit too crazily. Landed a short uppercut. Benny started wrestling immediately, scrambling his backside off. It was just scramble city in that first round. Anthony Orozco. I'm going to refer to Anthony Orozco as Anthony and Benny Orozco as Benny. I'll try my best to not get those mixed up. But Anthony defended the positions really well, managed to stay on his feet, defended smartly, was landing powerful strikes, in my opinion, but was rushing too much in round one, especially when he had a spinning elbow, and Benny managed to punish that with a wrestling entry. But Anthony, what I loved, gorgeous knees to the body whenever they tried to, whenever they were up against the fence. Anthony really surprised me, and I know he's got a good grappling base. We've seen it as an amateur. We know he's got a good wrestling pedigree. But I thought Benny just looks like a wrestler. Just the way he's built, the very massive looping overhand into the single leg. He just felt like a throwback wrestler, like early 2000s MMA. That's what he kind of looked like, and I thought, well, this guy's probably going to come in here and really try to get Anthony on the ground. But Anthony just stuffed so much. Every time he defended a takedown, he was just punishing Benny. Lots of strikes on the ground, really just like to the body, to the head, just punishing Benny with ground and pound. I scored it 10-9 for Anthony in round one, and then it started to get ugly from there on out. Round two, Anthony head kick early, looked brilliant, because it wasn't a question mark kick by any means, but the way he dragged his foot up looked like it was going to be a roundhouse, and Benny partially dropped his arms just to kind of protect his midsection, and it just went straight upstairs. Really almost caught Benny off guard, partially landed, was a lovely strike. But Benny was diving on the legs of Anthony early and really just getting stuffed and beaten up. Strikes to the head, strikes to the body. There was a gorgeous reverse triangle in this round from Anthony, which, immediately when he went for that, having seen the way he was striking and trying to hurt Benny, and then seeing the way he was going for these subs, I was very much, I was already writing, look, this guy's the real deal. I don't care if it's premature to say it. You can just tell when a fighter is just fucking good, right? If you watch enough fights, especially if you watch enough fights that aren't just the UFC, right? You know when you see a good fighter, and Anthony Orozco is one of those. I don't care if it's 2 fights into his pro career, did enough as an amateur, and he's shown enough here. He's not just this powerful striker or this explosive guy. He goes long in this fight, almost the whole 15 minutes. It almost goes to a decision. I gave him a 10-8 in round 2, had it 20-17 going into round 3. Calf kicks early. Benny diving on the single leg, just had no answer for anything. Didn't want to stay on the feet with Anthony, but at the same time, going to the ground meant, he had his face pushed up against the mat pretty much the whole fight, and Anthony was just pummeling him. Anthony goes for the rear naked choke, doesn't get it, a bit too high on it, but bails on it, and then goes back to just playing the bongo drums on Benny's head. Tries to attack the far side Kimura. Benny defends well, and look, Benny's a solid grappler. Certainly survived for a lot of the fight until he didn't. Despite dominating everything on the ground, Anthony towards the end lets Benny up, lands a really nasty elbow, drops Benny, lets him back up again, cracks him with a left hook, straight right hand. Down goes Benny. Referee decides he's seen enough. Just a total destruction. 2-0 now as a pro. Mega prospect at 170 pounds for me. I think the sky is the limit for this guy. I try not to go too crazy, too overboard, but I'm very, very excited about Anthony Orozco's future. Get this guy another fight ASAP. And now I guess we go into, a portion of the card that I was less excited about. These are fighters that, a lot of these guys making their Cage Warriors debut, and they're certainly exciting fighters in their own right, but I didn't really have much excitement coming into the fights, in all honesty. The next one was Ronald Shahan versus Andrew Johnson Cabrera, which ended by unanimous decision, 30-27 to Shahan. I scored it very similarly as well. I thought Shahan was, a sniper for sure in this fight. Johnson Cabrera, very unorthodox, doing a lot of feinting, doing a lot of flapping around, head movement, but wasn't, he was drawing reactions out of Shahan, but the whole point is to kind of capitalize as well on those reactions, throwing out a lot of feints, but just doing nothing with it. And Shahan was just adding up on his strikes throughout the entire fight. Calf kicks, side kick at one point, lovely kind of right hook, left hook to the body, like really chaining them, like essentially right hook and then left hook to the body within a matter of seconds. from Chasen. I really like that. He did it a few times in round 2. You know, Johnson Cabrera, super tough guy. I mean, I don't know how his chin managed to withstand a lot of what Chasen threw at him. There was a head kick in there towards the end of round 3. The guy's just super tough. There was a calf kick that staggered Johnson Cabrera. The problem for Chasen here was he could have finished the fight at least 2 or 3 times. Every single time he had Johnson Cabrera partially hurt, he would just rush him. Flying knee against the cage for literally no reason. Had him hurt with the calf kicks, just went right against the fence, ended up getting grappled against the fence. If he just toned it down a little bit, practiced a little more patience, kept his hands up, he could have easily finished Johnson Cabrera. But Chasen is a very exciting flyweight. Like, Cage Warriors are building out this roster of flyweights, and he's an exciting one because we have seen these guys from Indonesia fight in the UK, so we know that he's someone that we could see in our scene too, and not just in the San Diego one. 8-1 now as a pro. His only losses to Ray Saruya, who he lost to in the road to UFC actually, and Ray. I mean, if you've been following me for a while, Ray's one of the best flyweight prospects in MMA in general, so no shame in losing to him. Excited to see what Chasen does next though. Could have finished this fight, could have been, you know, a more praiseworthy portion of the pod for me, but definitely some fun signs there that we could be seeing a good fighter here. So now we move on to the prelims, and I'll probably breeze through these because, you know, while there were some good finishes here, there wasn't a crazy amount of interesting shit that happened. We had Corvin Allen versus Brandon Carrillo, which ended by TKO in round 2. Allen 2-2 as a pro, making his Cage Warriors debut. Carrillo also making his Cage Warriors debut, 3-1 as a pro. Originally missed weight coming into this fight, made weight at the second time of asking. Carrillo wasted no time at the start charging at Allen. Allen hadn't fought in a year, so potentially some cage rust, some ring rust there. Pressed him against the fence. The two just took turns really kind of switching positions on the fence. Carrillo did spend a lot of the round of a body triangle locked in, but couldn't get a submission in on Allen. Allen defended super well. With a minute to go, got back to his feet and took Carrillo down with a power double. Carrillo did dominate a lot of the positions, but Allen landed some nice shots late on. Could have gone either way this round, 10-9 either way. I felt that, you know, Allen definitely had the more impactful moments. Carrillo had all of the control, and it was interesting to see Allen weather the storm, weather the rear naked choke, despite the inactivity recently, and really go for it in round 2. Because in round 2, it was all Corvin Allen. Carrillo went in on a single leg early. Allen defended and then landed a lovely suplex straight into mount. Carrillo did reverse position to take Allen's back. Carrillo started attacking the rear naked choke again, but was too close to the fence to get any leverage really. And Allen quickly went back to his feet. Sneaky head kick from Allen as they disengaged, and then the fight returned back to the ground. But what probably wasn't highlighted enough in the broadcast was that the head kick that Allen landed on Carrillo, I really think that did hurt Carrillo, and it's why we ended up going to the ground so quickly thereafter. Because from that point, Carrillo didn't look like the same fighter. Allen started landing some solid strikes on top, really letting off with the elbows, which I always like to see. Allen passed the side control, started dropping more elbows, was really wilting Carrillo. Brutal and a grinding pace from Corvin Allen. And then it's just almost sad, really. Carrillo just trying to scramble, but completely stuck underneath Allen, who was just landing elbow after elbow after elbow. Serious intent behind them. You know, referee warns Carrillo. Again, Allen just landing more and more powerful strikes on a defenseless Carrillo. And then eventually the referee stops the fight with a few seconds to go in the round. I think Allen did really well to overcome some first round adversity and absolutely break Carrillo in the second. Smooth stuff, really. 3-2 now is Corvin Allen. Really enjoyed this one, actually. Enjoyed seeing a fighter look like they're probably going to get smothered and then just completely turn the fight on its head. Props to the guy, and I'm sure we'll see him again. Manuel Medina versus Enrique Montalvo is the next fight that we'll talk about, and we won't talk about it for long because it didn't last very long. Manuel Medina, you guys will probably remember him as the guy who made his Cage Warriors debut in September and had a 40-second submission, which is always impressive. Montalvo, obviously winless as a pro, but the fun thing here was that he'd lost to Medina as an amateur. So, when I say winless as a pro, he's only had 2 fights, so it's not like he's 0-41, like Reece Street or something. But, definitely some history there between the two. Lost via first round knockout to Medina, and this fight didn't really go his way because if we were impressed by Medina's 40-second submission back in September, we'd certainly be impressed here. Medina, nice front kick early, powerful right hand over the top. Montalvo, a bit staggered, and Medina just jumps on his back and chokes him unconscious, literally. No tap from Montalvo, is put straight up to sleep by Medina. Utter perfection, 33-second submission, so easy for Medina. Love this guy's jiu-jitsu. Could watch him fight very regularly. One, because it's not very time consuming if he's finishing them in 30-40 seconds, but I actually really like what he does out there as well. So I'm sure they're going to continue matching him up against whoever the hell is courageous enough to take him on with that jiu-jitsu of his. Xavier Vines versus Miguel Peimbert is the next fight that we'll talk about. One of those that went to decision, but probably the best fight on the card in my opinion. Just a really fun back and forth fight. Vines 1-1 as a pro, making his Cage Warriors debut, but a good amateur background and also held some belts as an amateur. I can't quite recall the promotions, but has some pedigree winning big fights. Peimbert 2-3 as a pro, Bellator veteran. I think he's had 2 Bellator fights, making his Cage Warriors debut here too. What was fun about this fight, and I mean, we saw him a few times on this card, and we've seen him before, but always nice to see the crippler himself, Chris Lieben, as the referee, and he did a good job in this fight. But for me, Xavier Vines was the real story. One of the real stories of this card. Bright pink shorts, just a super athletic, uber explosive fighter, but patient as well at the same time. Really clean jabs on display from him, chopping calf kick behind it, and his calf kicks look like they're trying to fucking detach your leg from the hip, right? Like, this guy is throwing calf kicks with not just to prod and to throw different looks. He's really trying to maul your leg, and it definitely happened here in this fight. Vines just so comfortable, a real sniper in the cage. Peimbert, tough as nails, don't get me wrong, but every time he tried to flurry, Vines was there just punishing him with clinical strikes. A super rapid left hook as well. With a few seconds to go in round 1, Vines throws a calf kick which wobbled Peimbert. I scored it a very, very clear 10-9 to Vines. Round 2, left hook early from Vines, Peimbert shooting out of desperation, Vines stuffing it, and just, when you see a fighter like Vines, just every reaction is so explosive, you worry about his gas tank. And so I'm really excited and happy to see that this fight went all 3 rounds. You have here as well in round 2, just a lovely left jab from Vines, straight right behind the jab, just really cracking Peimbert's nose over and over again. Peimbert, as I keep saying, tough as nails, literally walked through everything that Vines threw and just kept trying to press. But every time he tried to be the aggressor, Vines was just punishing him. 2018, round 2, then round 3, a lot of fence wrestling in this one. Vines disengaging. Vines typically the aggressor in these exchanges, but Peimbert pulls guard at one point to go for an armbar. Vines was straight up conscious of that and just disengaged, which is always a smart thing to do when you're handily winning a fight. Right hook late in the round lands on Peimbert. The power shots just, they would have sat down a less tough fighter, in my opinion. A fighter with less of a chin than Peimbert would have gotten absolutely crushed. But I scored it 30-27 for Vines. A really fun scrap between both guys. Definitely a back and forth, but not an incredibly competitive back and forth. Just one of those where one guy's just beating on another guy who just will not give up. And those are always fun to see, from 2 angles, right? Because some fighters break. Like, if you throw everything at a guy and he's still walking forward in the 3rd round, some fighters break. Some fighters' his cardio falls off a cliff. I would much rather see a fight like this than see someone go in there knock someone out in 20 seconds. You learn a lot more about a fighter in these types of scenarios. And Xavier Vines, for me, we mentioned of Bobby Winther with Orozco, the kinds of guys you circle on a card like, I can't wait to watch this guy, or I'm going to watch a card just for this guy. Add Xavier Vines to that list for me. Massive circle around his name. Next time he fights on one of these San Diego cards, I will be there. On the pod, we often talk about my favorite fighters in the roster, right? In the Cage Warriors roster. And I often talk about like my favorite San Diego guys as well. Like I really sometimes keep it separate until we start seeing a bigger crossover, right? But James Settle for me is one of those guys, one of my favorites. Yes, he's 4-5 as a pro coming into this fight. But I love his kickboxing and I love this guy's jiu-jitsu. He's so good on the ground. And with this fight, look, back in June, he fought Franz Sormin, who was, 4-0, heavily favoured, and just beat the brakes off him, knocked him out. Johnny Gill, his opponent here in this fight, 1-0 as a pro, made his debut back in June, won by first round submission. So, an interesting, another undefeated guy for James Settle to take on. But the straight left right off the bat from James Settle, landing at ease. Johnny Gill's hands just always down by his waist, and he was getting punished for it. The jab from Settle was just a real beauty. I've spoken about it so many times, but it's really just stunning. They engage at one point. Johnny Gill tries to put some serious hands on James Settle. They manage to, eventually they end up on the ground, and Settle's crafty grappling was immediately on show. Found the back with ease, locked in his body triangle, and started softening up Gill with a host of strikes. And then, within that grappling exchange, Settle, still with the body triangle, flattens Gill out and starts to rain down strikes on the undefeated fighter. Lots of warnings from the referee, gave Gill every opportunity, but Gill was just completely trapped under Settle's hips, totally busted up from all the strikes. Settle at one point traps one of the arms so that Gill can't protect himself, which is always, just a veteran move, a crafty move. If you've got a guy practically, on the cusp of breaking, and break Gill he did. It took just 3 minutes in round one. Easy work for James Settle as the referee was forced to step in. 5-5 now as a pro. Just one of those guys I love watching fight. Crafty kickboxer, exceptionally crafty grappler. Is someone you can get at for sure. Like, and the record does show that, like a kill or be killed type. But yeah, James Settle for me, just a guy I love watching fight. And if he's going to be on the next San Diego card, I will be there. And last but certainly not least, the very first fight on the card, which was between Ephraim Ginting versus Sean Johnson. Ginting 6-1 as a pro, lost on the road to the UFC, much like Shahan, but making his Cage Warriors debut here. Sean Johnson, we've spoken about him before, owner of the greatest nickname ever, the Brutal Noodle, making his second appearance in the yellow gloves, 4-6 as a pro. This was all Ephraim Ginting, this fight. Only lasted a couple of rounds. Ginting kicking the calf early. Johnson trying to grapple, but, lovely from Ginting, using the front headlock to build his way back up to his feet after stuffing the takedown. Ginting then tries to take Sean Johnson down, straight into half guard, but Johnson's really tough to keep down, and hence the whole Noodle nickname. He's very slippery and he's very difficult to pin down, and you saw that in the first round. Johnson trying to reverse the positions every time they hit the mat, but Ginting eventually managed to find some comfort in the side control and some dominance as well. The round ended with Ginting doing some, landing some good strikes, not really rushing the finish, very composed. Loved the knees to the ribs of Johnson by Ginting. Those are real energy sappers, and fighters don't throw them enough when they've got an opponent down on the ground. A very clear one for Ginting, 10-9 in round one. And then in round two, Johnson, tries to go for a head kick early. Ginting just dives straight in on his legs, initiates the grappling. Clearly Johnson's a tough customer on the ground, but Ginting found success once he managed to get into side control, and that's what he did. Eventually managed to turn that side control into full mount. Johnson turns over on his stomach. Ginting begins to unload ground and pound. Lots of strikes. Johnson completely stuck. underneath the Indonesian. Very impressive, almost flawless performance by Ginting. He's now 7-1 as a pro. Another, I like these Indonesian fighters because it can go one of two ways. And on this card, it went perfectly for Renal Shahan and for Ephraim Ginting. The great thing is we know that we often see them on the UK cards, in the Rome cards. So let's get these guys matched up against better opposition, because we could be looking at some really, impressive up-and-comers. Sean Johnson, now 4-7 as a pro. I'm sure they'll always throw him onto these cards. He's just a fun test for fighters. Very unorthodox, very unpredictable. But Ephraim Ginting was the real story of this fight. And so ends 2023 for Cage Warriors. I mean, didn't end with a bang as it did last year with the New Year's Eve event and the Europe versus USA theme. This one was really it went out with a whimper. Isn't exactly what I want to say, because there were some good fights here, and it's not like they phoned it in for the last card, but it certainly wasn't what we're used to. But some really fun performances. I'll highlight again James Settle, Xavier Vines, Manuel Medina, really impressive. Corvin Allen, fairly impressive there. Shahan was really, really good, if a bit kind of erratic. Anthony Orozco, I ain't got it. There's no words for me for Anthony Orozco. He's just a top fighter, and he's going to have a very, very good career in Cage Warriors and in the UFC. No doubt he will one day get there, because he's just a ridiculous fighter, in my opinion. Bobby Winther, you already know this guy's just pure violence whenever he comes out. Ahmad Hassanzada, rolling knee bar, yes please, more of those. And then Roberto Hernandez, another comfortable decision for the 135er. Fairly good card. Not what we're used to as an end of year one, but we'll take it anyway. Good fights are good fights wherever they happen. I mentioned at the top of the pod that, although this is the last card of the year, it's not the last you'll hear from me this year, which for some that's great news, for others that's terrible news. But all jokes aside, we're going to do the end of year awards show in the last few days of 2023. We're going to have our fighter of the year. We're going to crown our fight of the year, which I'm super excited about. Our finish of the year, which is giving me so much anxiety because I've been staring at my list for weeks. And it's great that we didn't have anything on this card that could have contributed to any of the categories in the list. Well, potentially one, maybe. But other than that, not a crazy amount on this card that could have affected that. But I'm very excited to do the end of year awards show. It was one of the first episodes we did when we started the pod last year. This year technically. And it's always a fun one. If you're still listening to this, start hitting me up on Twitter, hit me up on Instagram. Who's your fighter of the year? What's your finish of the year? Let's see if we're aligned come the episode. But if you enjoyed this episode as well, please just leave a like, comment, review, wherever you're listening to it on. It always helps. I know a lot of people say that, but it really does kind of help build the bandwidth of the pod. And we're doing something quite unique here. The only podcast that, covers Cage Warriors exclusively and nothing else. Every single card, without fail, we cover. We do historical bits, which I've not done a great job of keeping that up, but we certainly do them. And we do fighter breakdowns as well. So it's not just reactions, it's analysis, it's historical pieces. So, stay tuned, stick with me. 2024 is going to be a blast. End of year awards show before we get there. Thank you very much for listening.